Emma Thompson entered a high-end car showroom clutching $280,000, only to face insults and ejection within 5 minutes. The manager, basking in his perceived victory, believed he'd ousted an outsider unfit for his elite domain. Yet, within a day, James Thompson, her spouse, arrived in a striking red Rolls-Royce, turning the tables with an irresistible ultimatum. Can one perfectly timed act, executed with precision, transform someone's perspective? Remain with us. This tale deserves your full attention. As dusk settled over Boston, Massachusetts, a soft glow bathed deserted sidewalks and flickering traffic signals. Emma Thompson, fresh from a heated session at the state capitol, her words still resonating in the halls, her heartbeat calm, chose not to return home. Instead, she navigated to Prestige Motors, a premier dealership renowned for serving the city's influential and affluent. Her mission was clear: to purchase a silver Mercedes AMG 63 Coupe, valued at nearly $280,000. Clad in a sharp navy pantsuit, she moved with poise and assurance. A delicate silver chain adorned her neck, faintly etched with "Truth over fear." Not a display, but a personal mantra. The showroom gleamed with quiet elegance, its surfaces pristine. She headed directly for her chosen car, oblivious that her identity and principles would soon spark conflict with someone who deemed her out of place. Her fingers grazed the Mercedes's hood when a voice pierced the calm. "Greetings, ma'am. I'm delighted to assist you today," a young man said, his tone warm and courteous. Emma glanced at him. A 20-something, neatly groomed, evidently new to the role. His name tag read, Ethan, his ill-fitting suit offset by his earnest demeanor. He clutched a tablet tightly, striving to appear self-assured. "If the AMG 63 catches your eye, I can guide you through its features," he offered, gesturing toward the car as if welcoming her to discover it, not to buy. Emma offered a subtle smile. Being met without prejudice was uncommon, especially in a city where reputations carried weight. For a fleeting moment, everything felt straightforward, respectful, ordinary. But before Ethan could continue, the room's atmosphere shifted, as if the air had chilled without a dial's turn. A brief pause, barely noticeable to most, gripped Emma's senses. It was a hush born not of void, but of anticipation. Someone was observing. Then, measured footsteps echoed across the polished showroom floor. A man emerged from behind a glass office wall, striding with the ease of one who owed no one haste, yet claimed every right to intrude. Edward Harris. His badge declared him sales manager, but his demeanor radiated authority laced with subtle arrogance. In his mid-40s, lean and rigid, he moved as if schooled by costly workshops on poise. His dark gray suit was impeccable, not ostentatious, but signaling superiority. His gleaming shoes left soft echoes in their wake. He held his silence initially. He didn't need words. His gaze swept the scene. The car, Ethan, then Emma. But when it settled on the silver chain at her neck, he paused. "Truth over fear" was inscribed there, small but unmistakable to him. That was enough. His expression didn't contort or mock, too crude for him. Instead, the shift was nuanced. His lips tightened slightly, his head tilted just a fraction, his eyes narrowed, not in shock, but in acknowledgement. Then he advanced. "Pardon me, Ethan," he said, stepping between the young salesman and Emma, as if they were invisible. Ethan faltered, his stance still tilted toward Emma. But Edward didn't wait. He faced her fully, hands clasped like a headmaster preparing a reprimand. "You're Emma Thompson, correct?" he asked, his voice even, mouth barely moving. "Congresswoman, I presume?" Emma met his stare, wordless. "Democrat," he pressed, letting the word linger a moment too long. It wasn't a welcome. It was a signal, and it struck sharply. The tone, not the words, but their delivery, seemed neutral, yet carried a quiet scorn, as if he were assessing whether she was confused, jesting, or simply unaware of her surroundings, as if this weren't her domain to enter. No assistance was offered, no greeting to Prestige Motors, just a clear undercurrent. You don't fit here. Ethan edged back, mouth opening briefly before he reconsidered. He sensed it now, too, the unspoken shift in the air. The manager's voice remained level, yet the room felt more intense, constricted. The faint jazz overhead now seemed jarring, like a melody during an emergency. Edward gave a sharp, mirthless chuckle. "Isn't it ironic?" he said, his voice carrying now. "Folks like you, always on screens, championing the underdog, the downtrodden, the flawed system, then stroll in to buy a Mercedes worth more than a teacher's 5-year salary." He nodded slowly, as if persuading himself. "Must feel grand. All that advocacy for the masses really brings in the cash, doesn't it?" Emma remained motionless, her gaze fixed on his. She stayed silent. She didn't need to speak. His words tumbled out faster now. He'd opened the floodgate and couldn't halt. "I'll bet," he went on, "it's campaign contributions, political backers, or maybe a discreet bonus for voting the right way." He laughed again, louder this time. Others noticed. 2 junior salespeople by the reception desk glanced up. One smirked, the other shook his head. Edward stepped closer, not hostile, but just bold enough to assert his fearlessness. "It's the same old tale," he said. "You preach fairness, equality, uplifting others. But the moment you taste wealth or influence, it's all about plush seats and German craftsmanship, right?" He gestured to the AMG 63 coupe behind her. "This car? It's for those who know their place, who play the game correctly, who earn their spot." He scanned her again, not with curiosity, but with critique. "Not for those who waltz in thinking catchphrases and speeches suffice." Ethan finally retreated a step, shoulders stiff. He wasn't prepared for this. No one had briefed him on handling a manager insulting a congresswoman. But Edward didn't care who Emma was, or perhaps he did, and that was the issue. He shook his head, as if personally let down. "Your title doesn't matter, Congresswoman," he said. "You stride into a place like this, sporting that little necklace, truth over fear, acting like you belong. That's daring." Then he smirked at last. It wasn't kind. It was the smirk of someone who thinks they've just cut another down. But daring doesn't mean you're wanted. With that, he pivoted slightly, as if the matter were settled, as if his verdict were final. "You don't belong, and I've ensured everyone knows it." Edward's final words lingered like a taunt, smug and conclusive, as if he'd delivered the last line of a drama he believed he'd mastered. Emma stood utterly still. Her body didn't stiffen. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't scoff, for she'd faced this before. Perhaps not in this precise room, not before this precise man, but in this precise moment, when someone with just enough authority tries to diminish you, when disrespect is woven into dialogue as if it's routine, when you're provoked to react because your reaction will be the true issue. She took a slow breath, then spoke. "I'm here to buy," she said evenly, firmly, her eyes piercing his. "Not to campaign." Her voice didn't escalate. It didn't need to. Its steady, rooted cadence made each word resound louder than Edward's barbs. "I came because I admire the car. I didn't arrive with reporters. I didn't bring media. I didn't bring politics. You dragged that in the moment you spoke." Edward shifted, not retreating, but no longer pressing forward. His stance froze, not defensive, but less cocksure. Emma took a measured step closer, not menacing, but resolute. Her presence commanded the space in a way no outburst could. "I don't owe you my financial records," she said. "I don't need to justify why I can afford this car or how I use my earnings. I'm not here to argue my character. I'm here to purchase a vehicle, not to be judged like one." She paused, letting the words sink in. Ethan, silent until now, shifted uneasily, swallowing hard. He didn't know how to proceed, but he felt the shift. The room's climate had altered. Emma had reclaimed her footing. "If my politics bothered you," she added, her voice sharpening just a touch, "you could have kept that private. But you made it personal. You wanted to signal that this place, this showroom, this car's price, wasn't for someone like me." The silence after Emma's words was dense, not hollow, but charged. It seemed to press against the glass walls. Ethan stayed still, staring at his shoes, as if they held answers. Other staff drifted further back, not out of deference, but to avoid the fallout. No one wanted to be caught in what was brewing, and Emma stood there, composed, steady. But her patience now had a bite, and Edward sensed it. He spoke as if citing a rule, as if it were etched on the showroom's back wall, but it wasn't. It was personal. Everyone knew it. "Our brand," he continued, "serves a distinct clientele: professional, conventional, refined." The word refined carried a subtle jab, implying Emma lacked the privilege to belong. He glanced at her necklace again, truth over fear, as if that alone proved her misplacement. Then he crossed his arms, tilting his head. A feigned look of regret masked his face. "You've stated your case. Now I'm stating mine, ma'am," he said. "You're not welcome here, Congresswoman. I'm requesting you leave." A pause. No stir, no response, just that icy stillness again. Then the final calculated strike. "If you don't comply, I'll have security remove you." He didn't raise his tone. He didn't need to. That was his tactic. He wanted her exit to be heard, but his command to be unnoticed. His words were cloaked in decorum, but their intent was raw. "You don't belong. Never did. Now go." The injustice wasn't loud. It was courteous, polished, rehearsed, and that's what made it so vicious. Emma didn't budge immediately. Her back stayed straight, shoulders firm. Her face showed no crack of emotion, but a subtle shift gleamed in her eyes. Not surrender, but closure, as if a gate had shut. Not on her, but on them. She slowly turned her head, glancing once more at the car she'd come to admire, the one she wasn't permitted to touch, then faced the glass doors. She said nothing more. She didn't need to. Her heels tapped the marble floor, each step precise and deliberate. Not hurried, not furious, just final. The kind of stride that says, "You didn't triumph. You exposed yourself." Ethan, a few feet away, looked ashen. His eyes briefly met hers, and he murmured, just audibly, "I'm sorry." She paused at the exit, glancing at him. No smile, just a faint, quiet nod, the kind given to someone who nearly did right. Then she pushed through the door and stepped into the chill. The wind greeted her like an old friend, sharp, swift, and real. She crossed the nearly empty lot, passing rows of gleaming vehicles that shone in the showroom's reflection like prizes in crystal cases. Her Honda Accord waited at the lot's edge, where shadows stretched long. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't new, but it was hers. It had carried her through law school, campaigns, late-night flights, and early morning strategy sessions. Now, it was her refuge to breathe. She slipped into the driver's seat and shut the door with gentle hands. No slamming, no exhaling, just quiet. She stared ahead, fingers lightly gripping the wheel. Her expression was unreadable. The cold still clung to her coat. But the true chill wasn't the weather. It was the encounter she'd just endured. Edward's voice echoed in her mind, his faux calm tone, the way he wielded brand ethos as a blade, as if she'd breached etiquette rather than been degraded. She recalled his glance at her necklace, as if it bore an insult rather than a truth. She remembered his mocking laugh about taxpayer funds, the quiet chuckles from 2 staff members, the silent room of onlookers who said nothing. She blinked at last, reached into her coat, and retrieved her phone, unlocking it. 1 contact, James Thompson. She tapped call. It barely rang once. "Em," his voice came, deep, steady but alert, as if he sensed trouble. She didn't mince words. "I visited the dealership," she said, her tone even but sharp at the edges. "I wanted to see the Mercedes, the AMG 63, the one we discussed." A young guy greeted me, kind, nervous, maybe 22. Ethan was his name. He was genuinely kind, treated me like a proper customer. She paused, then added, "For about a minute and a half." James stayed silent on the line. Then the manager approached, she continued. Edward Harris, mid-40s, polished suit, polished smirk. He spotted me, eyed my necklace, said nothing at first. Then he recognized me, called me out loud enough for others to hear. Her voice held steady, but a keen edge emerged, tight, precise, cutting. He asked if I was Congresswoman Thompson, Democrat, as if that were a crime. She shook her head slowly. Then it began, the usual. He said it was amusing that someone like me wanted such a car. Suggested I might be using campaign funds or taxpayer money. Said the dealership served a particular clientele. You know what he implied. James let out a slow, deep breath. Then he declared I didn't belong there, she said. And when I didn't leave quickly enough, he threatened to call security. She added, not shouted, not screamed, just calmly, like he was asking me to wipe my shoes before entering a wealthy man's home. A long pause followed. Emma could almost picture her husband's face forming on the other end. He rarely got angry in the usual way. He didn't shout, he strategized. And Emma knew that silence. It wasn't peace, it was focus. I know precisely what to do, he said. That was all. No questions, no doubts. Emma leaned back in her seat, her breath finally breaking the car's quiet. The windows began to fog from the clash of her warmth and the outer cold. She didn't clear them. She let them haze. Because whatever Edward Harris thought he'd achieved by forcing her out, whatever smugness he felt for humbling her, he was clueless about what she'd just unleashed. The next morning, Prestige Motors swung open its glass doors as on any weekday. Clouds blanketed the sky, the streets hushed, and inside, the showroom hummed with soft murmurs and sales pitches over jazz tunes. Edward Harris, rested and self-satisfied, stood by the main display, scrolling through specs on a tablet, while chatting lightly with a couple admiring a Bentley Continental. He wore a crisp suit, light gray with a deep blue pocket square, and the same haughty air he always carried, especially after what he saw as a triumph the previous day. He'd said little to the staff about the incident, merely dismissing it. Some folks just don't match the brand, he'd muttered, chuckling. Then, abruptly, the showroom's mood seemed to cool, not from a thermostat, but from instinct. A sound drifted in from outside, not loud, not pressing, but rich and steady. A low, silken engine. Purr, so finely tuned it felt more like a pulse than mechanics. Heads near the windows turned. A junior associate pressed against the glass, eyebrow raised. A Rolls-Royce Phantom, crimson red, black trim, chrome gleaming like a mirror, slid across the dealership's private drive as if it owned the ground. It didn't park. It settled. When the engine hushed, the silence wasn't mere quiet. It was intentional, purposeful. All eyes turned inward. Ethan, by the reception desk, froze mid-sentence. His eyes widened as the Phantom's door opened. Then came James Thompson. He stepped out unhurried, without flourish. He needed no spectacle. His presence bore the weight of ancient stone, solid, unyielding, undeniable. His charcoal gray suit was cut to perfection, coat slightly unbuttoned. No tie, just a crisp white collar open at the neck, like a man emerging from a strategy session, not a corporate office. He didn't stop to survey the scene. He knew his destination. And as he crossed the glass threshold, the room transformed, not instantly, not noisily, but completely. Words halted mid-sentence. Clients softened their voices unconsciously. The showroom's curated calm shattered at its edges, not from anything James said, but from what he embodied: intent, resolve, and authority. He moved like a man uninterested in pleasantries, focused solely on results. Edward, near the Bentley, cast a casual glance over his shoulder, expecting a VIP to woo. But when his eyes met James, his face paled. He tried to steady his expression, to square his shoulders, but his grip tightened on the tablet's edge unnoticed. His smirk vanished. His posture held, but its confidence fractured. Ethan, now to the side, whispered, "Oh my God," and stepped back, sensing a moment far beyond a sale was unfolding. James didn't pause. His eyes locked on one target. No sidelong glances, no greetings, no smiles. He reached the showroom's center, facing Edward, and stopped deliberately. He said nothing, but words weren't needed. Everyone felt the shift in power, and it was stark. Edward stood frozen as James closed the gap, each step deliberate, laden with purpose. He tried to maintain his facade, chin high, shoulders broad, but his eyes betrayed him. The bravado he'd worn like armor the day before was crumbling fast. James halted a few feet away, stance relaxed but inscrutable. His voice emerged low, steady, not a threat, but a judgment. "You didn't reject my wife yesterday because she couldn't pay for the car," he said, eyes fixed on Edward. "You rejected her because you couldn't tolerate who she represents." Edward shifted. "That's unfair," he said hastily, a nervous laugh escaping. "She came in with an attitude." "No," James cut in, not louder, but piercing. "She came in with self-assurance. You misread it. Or perhaps you just couldn't bear it." Edward raised his hand slightly, now defensive. "Look, I didn't recognize her at first. When I did, that's when it started," James interrupted, eyes unwavering. "You knew who she was, and instead of showing her the respect you offer every rich client who walks in, you chose to shame her." Edward straightened, grasping for control. "I was safeguarding the brand's integrity. We cater to a specific crowd." James stepped closer, his voice lowered. "You mean white? You mean conventional? You mean obedient? Don't sugarcoat it. You saw a woman who didn't fit your image of who deserves a luxury car, and instead of rethinking your image, you decided to make her feel like the outsider." Edward's voice grew taut, defensive. "That's not what happened. I can refuse service. It's not personal." James's face remained impassive. "It was entirely personal. You singled her out by name. You created a spectacle. You challenged her finances, her career, her honor." "She wore that necklace," Edward shot back. "Truth over fear, right? That's political." James didn't blink. "It's a principle, which you clearly mistake for partisanship." He advanced again, not aggressive, but unmovable. "My wife isn't merely a congresswoman. She's a civil rights lawyer who's fought for people you'll never comprehend. She's faced harassment, doxing, threats. Yet she entered here alone, expecting to be treated as a buyer, not a problem." Edward fell silent, trapped not by volume, but by truth. You don't have to support her. You don't have to agree with her views. But when you use your role to demean her for what she stands for, you've crossed a line. James's voice grew colder, not louder, but like iron sealing a fact. "You don't get to turn customer service into a tool to exclude. You don't get to cloak real prejudice in polite phrases, and you certainly don't get to make my wife feel lesser for daring to enter with pride in her identity." The showroom's silence was absolute. No phones buzzed, no keyboards clicked, no steps echoed. Even Ethan, frozen at the edge, seemed to hold his breath. Edward's mouth hung slightly open, but no words emerged. His defenses had collapsed because James Thompson hadn't shouted. He'd simply reclaimed the space. The stillness after James's words was heavy enough to halt time. It bore down on every corner, making the air feel dense. No one spoke, not the clients near the display cars, not the junior staff, and definitely not Edward Harris. Then footsteps, calm, costly, the kind that herald power before the person appears. From a corridor off the private offices, a new figure emerged. Mid-60s, tall, lean, in a navy suit, with white hair and signature glasses. This was Charles Bennett, owner of Prestige Motors. He appeared only when stakes were high, and they were. "Mr. Thompson," he said smoothly, offering a hand. "I'm Charles Bennett. I understand there's been a mix-up." James didn't move at first. He sized Charles up, not the suit, but the intent. Then, slowly, he shook his hand. Firm, brief, no smile. "Mr. Bennett," James said. This was no mix-up. It was perfectly clear. Charles nodded once, his eyes flicking to Edward, who seemed to wish for invisibility. "I assure you, we don't tolerate such conduct here. I'll address my team directly." "I'm not here for apologies," James replied evenly. "I'm here for accountability." The words landed with a chill. Charles blinked, but didn't interrupt. "I'm still prepared to buy the car my wife wanted, the AMG 63 Coupe. No deals, no favors. I'll pay in full today, as she planned yesterday. But there's one condition. Your sales manager, Mr. Harris, must attend a gala next week. It's the Valor and Unity Gala, a fundraiser for disabled veterans. My wife is hosting it. She helped create it. It's not political, it's human." Charles's stance shifted. He was calculating risks. "If he agrees," James said, "we finalize the sale today. Clean, professional. If he refuses, I leave, and every client I deal with, from New York to San Francisco, will hear what happened here. I don't need headlines. A phone call or two will do." Edward's mouth opened, then closed. His hands clenched behind him. His face was drained of color. Charles cleared his throat. "Mr. Thompson, I hope you see we don't take sides. We serve all equally." "No," James countered instantly. Edward didn't. His words struck like a hammer. "And your silence until now speaks volumes about what you let slide until it became a problem." Charles didn't argue. He had no footing. In the background, Ethan stood by the service counter, tablet limp in his hands, his eyes fixed on James, not in fear, but in awe. He'd never seen a man command a room without shouting, without posturing, just pure, precise presence. Charles turned to Edward. "You'll attend the gala," he said firmly, "not an option." Edward blinked. "Sir, with respect." "This isn't about respect now," Charles interrupted. "It's about consequences." James said nothing for a moment. He let that settle, then nodded once. "I'll have the paperwork ready in an hour," he said. Charles gave a subtle nod, then muttered something to an assistant. Edward remained still. James gave him one final look. Not with anger, not even judgment, just stark clarity. "You tried to make my wife feel she didn't belong," he said. "Now you'll spend an evening with people you deem unworthy, people who've given more than you ever will. And maybe, just maybe, you'll grasp what belonging really means." He didn't wait for a response. He walked toward the showroom's central lounge, where Ethan was already scrambling to gather documents, his hands trembling slightly. The tension lingered like smoke, for all knew what had transpired. James Thompson hadn't just bought a car. He'd realigned the room's entire dynamic. In the wake of the silence James left at the dealership, a new kind of stir began to infiltrate Edward Harris's life, one he wasn't accustomed to. It wasn't uproar, not scandal, not reprimands from above. It was quieter, weightier, introspection. And for the first time in years, he had no rehearsed lines to navigate it. When the Valor and Unity Veterans Gala arrived, he didn't appear with pride or defiance, but with grudging duty, wearing a pressed black polo. No badge, no clipboard, just orders. Help as needed, show respect, stay visible. He'd hoped to send a substitute. Bennett refused. So there he was, in the resplendent ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel, Boston. Chandeliers glowed like captured flames above a crowd he'd never imagined joining. No sales floor, no branding, just people. American flags framed the stage. Round tables, draped in deep navy cloth, were surrounded by gold-backed chairs, hosting men and women shaped by sacrifice, veterans of all ages. Some shared laughs with loved ones. Others sat in quiet, their medals worn humbly. Edward moved through the space wordlessly. He didn't know how to engage. He didn't know what to say to those who'd endured realities he'd only skimmed in half-read articles. At the check-in desk, he received a volunteer badge and a task. Assist William Carter, a Vietnam-born American, Purple Heart recipient, Afghanistan vet, now wheelchair-bound after an IED took both legs near Kandahar. Edward hesitated instinctively. He felt unprepared. He was, but there was no time to linger. He found William near the ballroom's front, late 60s, tanned, square-jawed, white crew cut under a navy cap with faded yellow stitching. 101st Airborne. No slack. His hands rested calmly, knuckles scarred, one finger gone. He looked up at Edward, not with distrust or warmth, just curiosity. "You my guide tonight?" he asked, voice dry but not harsh. "Yes, sir," Edward answered softly. William nodded once. "Then let's move. The flag ceremony's soon." They navigated polished floors and crowded paths, past senators in tuxedos and women in glittering gowns. Edward said little. William didn't either, but their silence felt distinct, genuine. As they reached the front rows, Edward adjusted the chair's angle, then sat behind him, hands loosely on his knees. He scanned the room, not as a sales hub or networking venue, but as a space filled with people who didn't seek applause, yet deserved it. On stage, a young woman sang the national anthem. The crowd rose slowly, unevenly, some with vigor, others with aid. William stayed seated, hand over his chest. When the song ended, a speaker took the podium, calling out veterans by units, conflicts, and heroic acts. Applause followed each name. Each story carried gravity. Beside him, William occasionally nodded, recognizing a name, a place, a voice's timbre. Once, he whispered, "He was in my unit. Took shrapnel to the face, still saved 3 men under fire." Edward stayed silent, but his jaw clenched. These weren't numbers. They were lives, carried in aching bodies, memories that haunted nights. Later, pushing William toward the banquet hall, Edward spoke. "Do you still connect with them?" William raised an eyebrow. "My guys?" "Yeah, some. A few drank too much. Some vanished. But a few, yeah." He paused. "You?" Edward blinked. "Me? I never served." William gave a faint smile. "Didn't mean served. Meant your people. The ones you stand by. Got any?" Edward didn't reply. Not because he lacked them, but because he'd never framed it that way, as standing by anyone without a paycheck. The question lingered longer than he'd admit. As the night wore on, Edward handed out programs, poured coffee, fetched utensils for elderly guests, even held a door for a double amputee Marine named Mike, who joked about his prosthetic falling if Edward misstepped. In that untransactional service, something stirred. Not loudly, not dramatically, but it did. The room held people he'd once dismissed by assumption. Men in worn uniforms, women in simple dresses with military pins, not gems. People who didn't probe his origins, beliefs, or votes. Who treated him with kindness, not because he earned it, but because they chose to. And Edward saw this was the crowd he'd thought Emma Thompson didn't merit. But they were her allies, always had been. She wasn't feigning her fight for America. She stood shoulder to shoulder with those he'd once overlooked. Near the night's end, as lights dimmed, and a final speaker, a mother who lost her son in Ramadi, took the stage, Edward gripped William's chair tighter. Her voice was steady, her story raw. She spoke of a knock, a folded flag, a life of empty birthdays. She closed not with bitterness, but with a message. Sacrifice isn't tied to politics. It's tied to love, silence, and sometimes strangers who listen. When the applause rose, soft, reverent, Edward didn't join at first. He stared ahead, eyes misty but dry, chest tight. William glanced back. "Heavy evening, right?" Edward nodded slowly. "Yeah." "You'll carry it," William said. "No need to tell anyone. Just don't let it fade." As guests began to leave, Edward wheeled William toward the elevators, past flags, photos, and honor boards. For the first time in ages, he felt small in a good way, like someone who'd entered a room of titans and been permitted to stay. He didn't know if it would change everything, but it changed something. For a man like Edward Harris, that was more than expected. The gala was winding down, but the room's weight hadn't lifted. As servers cleared tables and a jazz trio played faint closing notes, a sacred stillness lingered. The silence of truth revealed. It wasn't mere courtesy anymore. It was hearts striving to contain emotion. Edward stood by the banquet hall's edge, beside William Carter's wheelchair. The veteran had grown quieter, his body weary, but his eyes sharp. Edward didn't know where to place his hands, so he rested them on William's chair, unsure whether to stay or fade away. He hadn't meant to linger this long. He hadn't expected to feel anything. But after the stories, faces, and buried memories, he stood in a space he felt unentitled to occupy. Then her voice came, soft, but commanding. He turned cautiously. Emma Thompson stood a few feet away, in a navy gown, simple yet elegant. A silver eagle pin with a ribbon adorned her chest, the event's emblem. Her hair was swept back, her stance calm, her face not angry, but steady. "I didn't expect you here," she said quietly, her calm cutting deeper than any confrontation. Edward looked down, not tactically, not in shame, but instinctively. Everything he'd assumed about her, her essence, her symbolism, her threat, had unraveled in that ballroom over 2 hours. When he looked up, his voice was softer, stripped of bravado. "I misjudged you," he said, each word intentional. "I saw you as a headline, a figurehead, a politician with a podium." He shook his head faintly. "But tonight, I saw those who rely on you. I saw the space you've crafted, the voices you uplift. And I realized your strength isn't your title, it's your soul." He paused, then added gently, "I refused to see it before, because seeing it meant admitting how little I knew." Emma didn't respond immediately. She stood still, observing him. Not as a foe, not even skeptically, just fully present, as if gauging the man behind the words. Then a deeper voice broke in. "Ma'am," William Carter said, shifting in his chair, offering a wry smile. "This guy messed up big, but he's not pretending now." Emma glanced at him. William nodded toward Edward. "He's been my wheels all night. Even helped me tackle VA paperwork I'd dodged for 2 years. He shrugged. Didn't gripe once. Edward looked surprised. He hadn't thought it mattered. He just acted. William went on. "I've had big shots talk over me, ignore me, use me for photos. But this one, he listened. That's worth something. Emma's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. Her arms stayed crossed, but her shoulders eased. Edward spoke again. I don't expect forgiveness. I wouldn't forgive me in your place. But I needed to be here. Not because James demanded it. Not because my boss ordered it. But because, after yesterday, I couldn't erase how I saw you and how wrong I was. His voice wavered slightly, not from emotion, but from truth's heavy release. I wanted you to feel out of place, he confessed, because deep down, I feared you belonged. That hit, not just Emma, but William and 2 nearby guests who'd lingered to listen. Emma stepped closer. Her heels barely sounded on the polished floor. I've been shouted at, threatened, undermined, she said. That's part of the job. She locked eyes with him. But your actions weren't just political. They were personal. You used your role to belittle me, and you did it with a smirk. That cut deepest. Edward nodded, ashamed. I know, he said. Yet, she added, you're here. You showed up. You listened. And from William's account, you didn't come to be noticed. You came to serve. That doesn't undo the past, but it counts. Edward swallowed hard. Thank you. William chuckled softly. Hell, I might let him roll me around next year if this happens again. Emma smiled then, a genuine one. It came slowly, not easily, but it came. I'll be honest, she said, addressing both. Yesterday, I thought, he'll never get it. He's too far gone. She looked at Edward. I'm glad I was mistaken. The 3 stood amid the faint clink of glasses, fading music, and soft murmurs of countless conversations. Edward exhaled, his posture easing for the first time that night. He still felt out of place, but in a good way. Growth is always uneasy. Emma rested a hand on William's shoulder, then faced Edward once more. When someone like me enters your showroom next time, she said, voice steady but pointed, don't wait for another chance to treat them right. I won't, he said. He meant it, and she knew it. As she turned and moved toward the ballroom's far end, where James waited by the exit in a sleek black tuxedo, Edward stayed with William, quiet, reflective. He watched Emma cross the floor. She didn't move like a victor. She moved like someone grounded, not by pride, but by purpose. And then, Edward Harris understood what he'd missed about her. Her power wasn't the loud, visible, deal-making kind he knew. It was quiet. It was carried in people. As Emma faded into the ballroom's golden glow, Edward stood rooted beside William's wheelchair. The music softened, nearly gone. Guests began to scatter, friends embracing, veterans swapping numbers. But Edward didn't stir. That exchange had anchored him, not in shame, but in humility. He'd expected public scorn. Instead, he received unforced forgiveness. It left a peculiar ache, not guilt, but awakening. Then he sensed another presence. He turned. James Thompson approached, composed as ever, but with a new look tonight, not the cold, transactional stare Edward recalled. This was a man who saw the full picture and was choosing his next move. In a sharp black tuxedo, his salt and pepper beard trimmed, James walked with hands clasped behind him. He stopped just short of Edward, holding a manila folder in his right hand. No preamble, no chit-chat, just the moment. James extended the folder. Edward paused briefly, then took it. Inside, purchase orders, specs, fleet pricing. 6 fully equipped Mercedes GLS SUVs for a national community safety program across 3 states. No fanfare, no headlines, just logistics and execution. You'll manage it, James said, voice calm, deliberate, if you keep carrying yourself as you did tonight. Edward blinked, flipping open the folder as if to confirm. This is, he faltered, searching for words. James nodded. Real. Their silence held truth, not tension. This isn't a handout, James continued. We have other vendors, larger, quicker. But this project involves community workers in Hartford, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, places you might have once overlooked. If you treat those teams as you did my wife, James added, his tone tightening slightly, we'll cancel the deal instantly. No second thoughts. Edward nodded. Understood. A beat passed. James exhaled slowly, then offered his hand. Edward didn't take it right away. He stared, recalling their last meeting in the dealership, when that hand symbolized all he'd lost. But now, it wasn't pity. It was a challenge and an opportunity. Edward shook it, firm, honest, unscripted. His voice cracked, not from emotion, but from unfamiliar sincerity. Thank you, he said, not for the contract or numbers, but for the chance to make amends. James held the grip a moment longer, then gave a single nod. Just keep it right. He turned and melted back into the gala's flow, like a commander returning to his post. Edward looked at the folder again. His fingers tightened, not from ownership, but duty. The room moved on, but inside he was still, not because he'd been handed redemption, but because he had to earn it. William, beside him, glanced over. You gonna tear up or get to work? The vet asked, half teasing. Edward laughed softly, his first real laugh in days. I'm thinking, he said. Don't think too long, William muttered, turning his chair. That contract's got 6 vehicles, and you already blew a day keeping one from someone's hands. The truth stung, but sank in. Edward nodded, tucked the folder under his arm, and pushed William toward the exit, this time with intent, not for show, for the task. The ballroom was nearly empty. Tables were half cleared. Volunteers stacked chairs quietly. But by the far windows, where Boston's lights shimmered through the glass, Emma Thompson lingered. She wasn't speaking or commanding attention. She stood with James, silently watching the last veterans leave the gala they'd helped build. And perhaps that was the crux. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply endures. Yet the air remained heavy. For what happened in that room wasn't just a fundraiser. It wasn't just Edward's reckoning, William's healing, or a political shift. It was rarer. A stark, human encounter with a truth many avoid naming. Not just in showrooms, offices, or elections, but in diners, cafes, streets, school boards. America doesn't suffer from too much difference. It suffers from too little respect. That's what Emma always held, even when called naive, even when urged to strike back, to escalate, to wield media as a weapon. But she didn't, because the issue wasn't difference. It was how people handled it. They saw a differing view and assumed deceit. Edward Harris wasn't unique. He was just another who thought political disparity justified personal cruelty. And Emma had seen it before. She'd read of a Colorado baker who refused a same-sex wedding cake, not for cost, but conviction. It reached the Supreme Court. Some called it religious liberty, others service denial. But it was simpler. One person deciding another's dignity was negotiable. She'd seen it in a Philadelphia Starbucks, where 2 black men were arrested for sitting without ordering, not disruptive, just waiting. Suspicion needed no logic, just bias and policy's guise. In Florida, a teacher offered extra credit for attending rallies, but only right-leaning ones. In California, a pro-life student was told her t-shirt upset others. Nationwide, political identity was outstripping race or religion in volatility. It was a lens for humanity, a line or lose your right to service, fairness, presence. Emma had lived both sides of that divide. In liberal circles, as a moderate Democrat, she was deemed not progressive enough. in conservative spaces, as a woman of color, she was subtly told, "You're fortunate to be here." But she never turned those moments into viral clips, never called the press, never screamed on TV, because what she and James valued didn't need clamor. It needed principle. So when Edward tried to shame her, they didn't sue, didn't expose, didn't retaliate. They acted with precision, quietly, decisively. They let integrity speak where society had learned to yell. James always said, "The firmest stance is the one that doesn't waver." And tonight proved it again. When he entered that dealership, he didn't aim to punish. He aimed to correct. When he offered Edward the SUV contract, it wasn't a payoff. It was a responsibility. Prove you're better than yesterday's self. True justice isn't always vengeance. Sometimes it's accountability. Emma had learned that painfully. Years ago, as a lawyer in Massachusetts, she defended a veteran denied housing over a dismissed charge. No conviction, just a record's mark. The landlord said, "We don't risk it." Emma battled months to clear his name. She won, not by shouting louder, but by outlasting the system without growing bitter. And that's what people missed. This wasn't about cars, sales, or politics. It was about the nation we choose when cameras are off. Do we embrace those we disagree with? Serve those we wouldn't vote for? Look strangers in the eye and say, "You count, even if I don't get you?" For Emma, it had to be yes. And tonight, something shifted. Not everything, not permanently, but enough. Because Edward Harris entered that room defensive and left humbled. Because William Carter, who'd seen war's worst, found unexpected kindness in a man who once wouldn't advocate. Because skeptical donors now sought Emma's next speech. And because James, her rock, proved again. Integrity enacted speaks loudest. As the last guests departed, Emma looked up. James returned from the coat check, holding their jackets. No entourage, no spotlight, just a weary man with pride in his gaze. "Ready?" he asked quietly. She nodded. They stepped through the Fairmont's main doors into Boston's cool night. The street buzzed with distant sirens and late taxis. City lights flickered across the river, and in their quiet moment, Emma murmured, "You did well tonight." James smiled. "You did too." They paused, coats over their arms, watching a valet deliver a bronze SUV to a donor. Emma exhaled slowly, then said, "Will it make a difference?" James didn't answer right away. Then he said, "It already has." She looked at him. He gazed ahead. Someone like Edward enters a room like that, thinking he's got the world figured out. Then he meets William and you. No one shames him, no one preaches. They just show him. He turned to her. And if he changes because of that, it counts. Emma nodded, slipping on her coat. He was right. The story didn't need to go viral to be true. The moment didn't need TV to be real. It just needed to happen. And last. And tonight it did. America might be fractured, but as long as people like Emma and James held their ground, not loudly, but clearly, there was hope. Not for agreement, but for remembering how to differ with decency. And maybe that was the start of something greater than any vote could bring. Maybe that was repair's beginning. A week after the gala, the air in the Thompson home still hummed with more than memory. Emma felt it in her calm morning routine. No press releases, no interview recaps, no viral clips flooded her notifications. That was how she wanted it. What happened that night didn't need broadcasting. It had fulfilled its purpose, not just for Edward Harris or the room of veterans and donors, but for something broader. The unseen gap between difference and dignity. That gap had moved. By late afternoon, Boston's skies hung heavy with pale clouds, casting a silver sheen over the city. Emma stood by their two-story home's window, sipping black tea from a ceramic mug, her gaze on the driveway below. Gold leaves littered the slate pavers, crisp and untouched. The house was silent. James was on a call in the back office, his voice low, steady. Then she heard it. Not jarring, but deep, smooth, like a machine whispering its value. A Mercedes-Benz AMG 63 Coupe, obsidian black with chrome trim, glided silently through the gates into the driveway. It didn't proclaim itself. It didn't need to. Its mere presence spoke, sleek, powerful, refined, without bravado. It moved as if called not by wealth, but by meaning. A suited delivery agent stepped out with practiced ease. He didn't knock or ring. He walked to the passenger side, opened the door, and waited. James appeared on the porch, pulling on a dark wool coat over his shirt. His steps were steady, unhurried, almost solemn. No proud grin, no strut. Just a man nearing a vehicle that was more than steel and power. He traced his hand along the roofline, fingers grazing the perfect finish, eyes narrowing slightly. Emma stepped out behind him, joining him on the stone path. "They said next week for delivery," she said, arms crossed against the breeze. James kept his eyes on the car. "Some things arrive sooner when you act with quiet resolve." She tilted her head. "So, this is it?" He nodded. "Just as you wanted. Black, sleek, understated." The car shone under the gray sky, subtle yet commanding. Emma circled to the front, her hand resting just above the emblem. "It's stunning," she said, "but I'm not sure it matters now." James turned to her. "It matters because it didn't define the fight." She looked at him, curious. He stepped beside her, voice soft but firm with conviction. "You didn't let this car become a trophy. You never cared about proving you could own it. You wanted to be seen as belonging, not for the money, but for who you are."